did not cry. I did not make a scene. I just stood there in the middle of the reception hall, holding my phone, reading that message for the third time, while the DJ played something with too much bass and my aunt tried to get people onto the dance floor. The text was from my direct manager at Hargrove Consulting. Not from HR. Not from the partners. From him. Sent at 7:14 p.m. on a Saturday, my wedding day, and it said, "Effective immediately. Your position has been eliminated. We wish you well in your next chapter. Consider this our gift to you as you start your new life." Our gift. I showed it to my husband without saying anything. He read it once, set the phone face down on the table, and looked at me with this expression I hadn't seen before. Not angry, not panicked, just very, very still. Then he smiled, slow and quiet, like he knew something I didn't yet. And he said, "Let's enjoy the rest of our night." I didn't understand what he meant. Not then. My name is Vivienne, and I had worked at Hargrove Consulting for 6 years. 6 years of arriving before anyone else, staying after everyone left, covering for colleagues who took long lunches and longer vacations, and learning the kind of loyalty that turns out to be entirely one-directional. I had built 2 of their biggest client portfolios from scratch. I had flown to Calgary in February to salvage a contract nobody else wanted to touch. I had worked through a bout of pneumonia because the quarterly review couldn't be rescheduled, and I was, as my manager liked to say, the only one who really understands these accounts. His name was Desmond, and he had been with the firm since before I was born. He was the kind of man who wore his authority like a coat he never took off, even indoors. His son, I'll call him by what everyone at the office called him, which was simply the ear, had joined the company 2 years prior directly into a senior role with no relevant experience, no industry background, and no apparent interest in acquiring either. The heir had opinions about everything and knowledge of almost nothing. He had once asked me, in a meeting with clients present, to run him through the basics of a file I'd been managing for 4 years. I had been patient. I had been professional. I had been, looking back, far too accommodating. The thing about working for a family firm is that you never fully understand the hierarchy until it turns on you. You think you're an employee. You think your work speaks for itself. You think the results you deliver, the billings, the retained clients, the referrals, are the currency that matters. They're not. The currency that matters is blood. Desmond had been grooming the ear to take over his senior accounts, my accounts, the ones I had spent years cultivating, and the here, it turned out, had decided he didn't want to learn the business so much as inherit it whole, clients and all, without the inconvenience of the person who actually built it still being present. My wedding was on a Saturday in late October, at a venue outside of Ottawa that my mother had been calling perfect for approximately 18 months. There were 112 guests, a string quartet for the ceremony, a caterer who specialized in what the menu described as elevated regional cuisine, and my mother-in-law's rose arrangements on every table because she had insisted and I had decided that hill was not worth dying on. Everything had been fine, better than fine, actually. My husband Callum, we had been together for 3 years, had cried a little during the vows and then pretended he hadn't, and I had pretended not to notice, and it was the most privately tender moment of my life up to that point. His parents were warm and funny and kept pulling me into hugs I hadn't expected to need as badly as I did. And then, at 7:14 p.m., my phone buzzed. I stood there reading Desmond's text, because I knew it was Desmond behind it, regardless of what the official sender line said, and the strange thing was how calm I felt. It wasn't the numbness of shock. It was something else. Something almost like clarity. 6 years of second-guessing myself, of wondering if I was imagining the way the hair dismissed my contributions and meetings, of telling myself I was being paranoid when files I owned started getting CC'd to him without my knowledge. All of it suddenly arranged itself into a shape I could see completely. I had not imagined it. It had been real, and it was over. What I did not do, in that moment, was call Desmond. I did not reply to the text. I did not walk out of my own reception. I set my phone down, took my husband's hand, and danced. What I did not know, what Callum had not yet told me, was that 3 weeks before our wedding, while I had been caught up in seating charts and vendor confirmations, he had been in a meeting of his own. Callum was a civil litigator 7 years in, recently made partner at a mid-sized firm in Ottawa that had a quiet but sterling reputation. He had been approached about a significant expansion, a merger, effectively, with a larger Toronto practice that was looking to strengthen its presence in the capital region. The kind of opportunity that, as his senior partner had put it, comes once, maybe twice in a career. Callum had mentioned it to me broadly. He hadn't told me the details because the details weren't settled yet, and because he knew I was overwhelmed with everything else, and because, this is the part I found out later, one of the senior partners in the Toronto firm was a man named Wentworth, who had been Desmond's largest client before I joined Hargrove. A client that had quietly, over the course of the past 8 months, been moved off my file and reassigned to the hair. I did not know that Wentworth had been appalled by this reassignment, that he had found the heir unprepared, dismissive, and frankly embarrassing in their last 3 meetings, that he had, in the weeks before my wedding, already begun the process of transitioning his business away from Hargrove entirely. I did not know any of this on Saturday night. I just danced with my husband and let the string quartet's final set wash over me. And when my mother-in-law pressed my face between her hands and told me I was the bravest woman she'd ever met, I thought she was talking about the vows. The call came on Monday morning. We were in Charlottetown for our honeymoon. My choice, because I had wanted something quiet and coastal and entirely unlike Ottawa in October, and PEI had delivered on all 3 counts. I was eating a scone on the porch of a bed and breakfast overlooking the North Shore when my phone rang. It was Desmond. I answered on the 4th ring, not because I was hesitating, because I was finishing my scone. Vivienne. His voice had a texture I hadn't heard before, something compressed and careful. I understand you received a communication on Saturday that may have been. I received a text informing me my position was eliminated, I said, on my wedding day, at 7:14 in the evening, which I believe you authorized. A pause. The timing was deliberate, I said. Another pause, longer. There were concerns about the transition of accounts. Desmond, I said. I had never used his first name without a title before. It surprised both of us. I'm on my honeymoon. I don't have an employment lawyer yet, but I will have one by end of day Wednesday. If you have anything further to say to me, I would suggest you say it to me. I would suggest you say it to them. I hung up. I sat there for a moment on that porch, watching the water, listening to the specific quiet that only exists on the island in the off-season, and felt something settle in my chest. Not triumph, not yet, just the solid, unmistakable sensation of having said exactly the right thing. Callum came out with his second cup of tea and looked at my face. Desmond? He asked. Yes. He nodded and sat down beside me and didn't say anything else, which is one of the things I love most about him. What happened over the next 6 weeks was, in some ways, almost boring in its efficiency. My employment lawyer, a woman named Philippa, whom a colleague recommended and who charged $400 an hour and was worth every cent, identified 3 separate violations of the Ontario Employment Standards Act in the manner of my termination, including the failure to provide statutory notice and the egregiously poor documentation of the alleged position elimination. She sent a letter. Hargrove's outside counsel responded. Philippa sent another letter. This one with a figure attached. Desmond, I was told, had not expected this. He had expected, I think, that I would be humiliated enough by the manner of my firing to simply disappear, that I would be too embarrassed or too exhausted or too occupied with being newly married to push back properly. This was, as Philippa put it in her understated way, a miscalculation on their part. But the employment matter was, in the end, the smaller story. The larger story was Wentworth. Wentworth. I never met him personally, but I came to understand him fairly well through the chain of events he helped set in motion. Was a methodical man who did not like having his time wasted. He had been a Hargrove client for 11 years, largely because of the continuity and competence of the team that managed his accounts. When that team had been disrupted, when I had been quietly sidelined and the here inserted in my place, he had not complained loudly. He had simply begun making other arrangements. By the time Callum's firm merger concluded, Wentworth had already signed a preliminary agreement to bring his legal and financial consulting work to the new entity. Callum's firm, and as part of the onboarding process, routine due diligence, nothing more. Wentworth's team had submitted a list of professionals they had worked with previously and found trustworthy. My name was on that list. Callum did not tell me this ahead of time. He felt, reasonably, that it was better for me to make my own decision without the complication of it being connected to him, so the call came from Wentworth's office directly, 6 weeks after my wedding, while Philippa was still negotiating my severance. They were looking, the message said, for a senior consultant with expertise in exactly the areas I had spent 6 years developing. Would I be available for a conversation? I called back within the hour. I want to be careful here about what I say, because I don't want it to sound like justice arrived in a clean, cinematic package. Real life is messier than that, and I know it. But what I can tell you is what happened, and what happened was this. Within 4 months of being fired via text on my wedding night, I had signed a consulting agreement that paid 30% more than my Hargrove salary with a scope of work I had actually designed myself, reporting to people who treated my expertise as an asset rather than a threat. What happened to Hargrove was not something I engineered. I want to be honest about that. But I also won't pretend I grieved it. Wentworth's departure had been the first crack. When his business moved, 2 other long-standing clients took notice. Clients who had interacted with the heir enough to have formed their own opinions. One of them left outright within the first quarter. The other placed their account on review. Desmond, from what I heard through the industry circles that are never as discreet as they imagine, was furious in the way that powerful men often are when consequences arrive, convinced there had been a conspiracy rather than a reckoning. The heir, meanwhile, had begun learning what it actually took to manage complex accounts without someone competent doing the work beneath him. The answer, as best I could gather, was that he had not taken to it naturally. There was a moment, about 5 months after the wedding, when I ran into Desmond at a conference in Toronto. I hadn't known he would be there. He didn't see me at first, and I had a second to decide, walk over or don't. I walked over, because I had made my peace with what had happened, and because there is a particular kind of power in not needing someone to feel bad in order for you to feel good. He saw me coming and his face did something complicated. He looked older than I remembered, more tired. "Vivienne," he said. "Desmond," I said. "How are things?" He said things were fine. I said I was glad. We stood there for perhaps 30 seconds in the specific silence of 2 people who have said everything they need to say through lawyers and have nothing left that requires a venue. Then I excused myself and went to find my colleague, who was waiting with 2 cups of conference coffee and a raised eyebrow. "How'd that go?" she asked. "Fine," I said, "exactly fine." Because that was the truth of it, not a dramatic confrontation, not a monologue delivered in a hotel ballroom while everyone watched. Just 2 people, briefly, and then the rest of a conference, and then the rest of a life. I think about the text sometimes. Consider this our gift to you as you start your new life. He meant it as a humiliation, and for about 45 minutes on a Saturday evening in October, it functioned as one. I will not pretend otherwise. But gifts have a way of becoming what you make of them, and what I made of mine was this: clarity, a settlement, a consulting practice I'm proud of, and the knowledge, firm and unambiguous, the kind you can only get from having it tested, that I had been right about my own worth all along. Callum still has the screenshot of that text. He framed it, small, in a simple black frame, and put it on the shelf in his home office behind all the legal texts. I walked past it one morning a few months ago and stopped to look at it, and he came and stood beside me, and we both just looked at it for a moment without saying anything. Then he made me coffee, and we got on with the day. I've thought about that text a lot since October. Not obsessively, just the way you return to a scar sometimes. Not because it hurts anymore, but because you want to remember that it healed. What Desmond did was calculated. He chose my wedding night because he believed I would be too overwhelmed, too distracted, too emotionally full to respond clearly. He thought the timing would break something in me. And I think what he never understood, what people like him rarely do, is that the timing was actually what made everything so simple. There was no ambiguity left, no room to wonder if I had misread the situation, or been unfair, or imagined the slow erosion of the last 2 years. He handed me absolute clarity on a silver platter and called it a gift. He wasn't wrong about that part. I've been thinking about what actually got me through it, and I keep coming back to 3 things, though I wouldn't have called them that at the time. The first is that I knew what I had done, not arrogantly, I'm not built that way, but accurately. 6 years of work leaves a record, and I had been honest about mine. I hadn't inflated my contributions or taken credit that belonged elsewhere. That kind of honesty with yourself is quieter than confidence, but it's steadier. When Desmond tried to erase what I had built, he couldn't, because it existed outside of him. Wentworth knew. The clients knew. The work itself knew. You can't fire a track record. The second is that I didn't act from anger, not because I wasn't angry. I was, briefly, on that porch in PEI, listening to Desmond's compressed and careful voice try to walk back what he'd done. But anger makes you loud when you need to be precise. Philippa was precise. The Employment Standards Act was precise. I let the tools do the work they were designed to do, and I stayed out of the way. That restraint wasn't weakness. It was the most effective thing I could have done. The third is harder to name, but it has something to do with not needing it to be a story. I didn't need a confrontation. I didn't need Desmond to admit what he did, or apologize, or suffer visibly in front of me. When I saw him at that Toronto conference and he looked tired and older and a little diminished, I didn't feel satisfaction so much as a kind of neutral recognition. Things had resolved themselves according to their own logic. He had made choices based on what he valued, and so had I, and the outcomes reflected that. That's not karma in any cosmic sense. It's just the ordinary arithmetic of how decisions accumulate over time. What I want, if anyone is listening to this and sitting with their own version of a 7:14 p.m. text, is for you to trust that arithmetic, not blindly, not passively, but with the knowledge that what you build honestly and tend carefully has a weight to it that other people cannot simply reassign. Callum still has that screenshot on his shelf. I walk past it sometimes and think, that was the night someone tried to humiliate me into smallness, and instead I got Philippa and PEI in the off-season and a consulting practice I designed myself. The gift in the end was mine to keep.